What a great session. Love all the names. Love everyone joining. Welcome to the advisory. This is our chance to basically go through some really powerful survey results that have come compliments of IDC around value management. So we're thrilled to kind of have this session with you. And we always like to start with this slide about the community growing. One of the big things we always hear about this community is, hey, we love the networking opportunity. We love to hear and see who's new and who's joining. So some new faces here. Take a look. And please know, if you see anyone on that list that is of interest, I see Jeff Salduti, who's with Workiva. Welcome, Jeff. Glad to have you here. We've got new members that are joining. And on this list, if there's anybody on this list that you're interested in connecting with, maybe they're a partner, maybe they're a prospect, maybe they're a potential customer, maybe they're just somebody that you'd love to have some time with, please let me know. Because one of the best things in my day is to have advisory ecosystem members get up and have some time with each other and meet with each other. And it's terrific. And I think Abi, who I always give a shout out to, Abi is one of the more prolific folks that has been reaching out to fellow community members. And I love that he does that. I want us to do more of that. So feel free, if you see a name or if in the larger list you have anybody, please reach out to me directly and I'll make sure we set up those one-on-ones. Okay, with that, let's jump a little bit into the agenda. I'm not going to go too far on this other than to say, I wish my eyes moved like they do when the judge was looking for them. I'll do a little bit on the background here. So we're going to go through the IDC survey. 53 members took this survey. Really powerful information that was brought forward. We're going to put a value management lens on it today. Eric Ranta, let me introduce Eric a little bit. He's phenomenal, folks. And so I'm going to quickly duck out of here because he runs a great meeting. Eric's the track chair. Is the Director of Cloud Advisors for the Americas for Google Cloud. Terrific track chair and somebody who runs a great session. And we're going to start out with Randy Perry. Randy's another member, and Randy's the Vice President of Sales Enablement at IDC. I always like to brag about Randy, which is he has literally done over 500 business value studies at customer locations. So over a decade, he's heard from our customers what they actually see in value and quantified. So he brings a great perspective. I'm going to let Randy kind of touch on some of the survey results, and then we're going to kick it over to Eric to guide us through the rest of the time. And I'm going to let Randy take it from here.
Thanks, Chad. And I'm just going to kind of briefly go through these and not spend too much time, although I have a tendency to drag on. But anyway, we want to get into the other pieces. So some highlights, having done a lot of maturity studies over the years, many a year, we find that the members are highly mature organizations. And we know that because their goals are primarily focused outwardly. So they're looking at, their customers and growing their revenue and things that are more outward focused rather than inward operations, which is really the first sign of an advanced company. However, they have significant challenges related to those goals: revenue growth and customer satisfaction. And the members also, we ask this question a lot these days, is, where are you today? Meaning, after COVID, where are you today in terms of your business operations? And most of the vast majority of the members are, either at stage 4, which is, fully recovered and ready to drive business growth, or stage 5, where you're already into the new normal or the next normal. And interestingly enough, to me, was that the most critical issue challenging members' success is that time-worn challenge for all IT companies is having the skills and content to engage C-level decision makers. These are, on average, these are large organizations that took the studies. You can see over 30,000 employees, significant revenues. The organizations that we talked to amongst sales, value management, and customer success were accountable for about 50% of their organization's revenue. They weren't heavily using partners. About 38% of their sales were through partners. And the sales organizations were significant size, 21% is about average for organizations of that size. The size of the customer success team, again, about 24%, about a quarter of the sales team. The area where they maybe differed, maybe didn't, was the value management teams are kind of small. Only 3% of sales people were involved in value management. And as you can see, we'll talk today about what kind of challenges that creates for these organizations. So what are the top business goals? As I mentioned earlier, the key ones most often mentioned were growing revenue, increasing customer experience satisfaction, improving profitability. Now, those three, very important. Again, typically you see advanced companies or leader companies focused on these things, especially this increasing customer experience and satisfaction. The more outwardly focused organizations are on the customer, the more successful they tend to be. The other thing that's been a huge jump is increasing employee productivity. All companies are facing this. One of the impacts of COVID is, with more and more of my people working remotely, am I going to be as productive? And so that's a much bigger concern than it used to be. But again, these business goals reflect very mature companies.
Randy?
Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
One from Morris Wallach, and he's asking, is there a mode or most frequent data? There's a concern that maybe the average skews high to a few large company respondents.
No, so this is 53 different companies. It wasn't based, there's no weight associated with it at all. So this is just how representative each of the companies answered.
Okay, great. And then the next is from David Sakamoto. And David, I'm sorry, when you asked this question, I think Randy was probably speaking, so it might be a little out of context, but what's in customer success and which groups? If you want to come off mute and elaborate, feel free.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I didn't realize it's an aggregate, so it's probably very mixed. I was wondering what's in customer success by this definition, because it can be varied based on what companies call customer success, like renewals, support, customer success teams, even solution architects.
You mean the term in customer experience? Or when you said customer success, you mean the different organizations that participated in the study?
I think it means the different functions.
Yeah, the different functions in customer success.
Oh, I'm sure that ecosystems can provide that at some point, the different functions that are in that.
Yeah, I think it was the broader term of customer success. So probably, David, you're thinking of those smaller groups that lie in a customer success organization, but we can get back to you with a response on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And then top challenges. We're always interested in challenges because ultimately our goal is to help our customers overcome those challenges. So attracting new customers, leveraging partner ecosystem, retaining existing customers. Those are the three biggest, again, very outward looking, very focused on increasing the size of the business and retaining and getting new customers. Then another issue that came up that prior to COVID was nowhere on the radar, which is attracting and recruiting top talent. That's become much more of an issue than it was pre-COVID. So a lot more tensions being applied now to retaining your best employees and making sure that you provide a workspace that's important. So this corporate empathy is really a new thing, but it's something that is kind of echoing through all the companies that we speak with. So always something to keep in mind when you're talking about the benefits associated with what your products and service deliver, that this and employee productivity are becoming more and more important to pretty much everybody out there. Okay, now we've given you the highlights. Now I'm going to turn this over to Eric. Oh, actually, I think there's a couple slides in here we're going to talk about first.
Yeah, you got a few more
Yeah,
about
I got
the
a
value
couple more. So
management.
these are also
Yeah.
from the thing. I'll turn it over to Eric in a second. But so these are some other questions from the survey. So one was, we found that of the participants in the study,
No, wait, it's not.
30% did not have a value management team. And we found that a lot of the problems that they were talking about and the challenges were related to not having a value management team. One was the ability to scale. The other was the ability to get better, customer success metrics up front, and to articulate those through the buying process, and then also deliver information about that at the end. So that was a real glaring thing. So our best practice is to have a value management team. And the other thing we saw as a best practice, especially with the leaders, was to get them more and more involved at each stage of the process, and not just the customer journey, but including when you get back and start thinking about product development and things like that. That you want to start developing your value messaging early on in the process, carry it through your marketing, carry it through your customer relationship, and then post delivery, set them up for follow-on sales and the next time you want to prove your value. So very important to get involved in all different stages. Okay, and again, value management, biggest issue, C-level buy-in. And that was, again, this particular slide's divided between leaders, which were the top 10% of these very advanced organization. So C-level buy-in, and then secondly, need to scale. And this goes back to that, again, 3% of the sales organization was dedicated to value management. And that's a pretty small percentage. So very difficult to scale unless you can pass on some of the tasks to other elements within the sales organization. Okay, there's still more. And then we asked, if value has not been realized, what are the most common, causal factors affecting the value realization? And I'm sure none of these are, surprising to you. Issues with adoption, always the biggest one. Organizational change management, which is essentially the same thing, right? Is you're trying to get your customers to do something different and do it in a way that they're going to be able to realize the value. Issues with implementation, same thing. And those are all the big drivers. So again, none of these I think were surprising. I think a lot of this speaks to having better communications with your customers so that they understand and they have some kind of sense of how long the value is going to take before they actually can see it, and the implications of adoption and change within their organizations that are going to help implement it. And I think those things are part of things you can work with a platform to provide that kind of communication and understanding up front, so you don't oversell the value realization early, and you track it all the way through the buying process, the delivery process, and the post value valuation process. And emphasize value realization with your customers and use multiple sources to document. Where's your organization getting data to measure value realization? And so these were the different sources. And we can see that the leaders, those in gold, they, part of what set them apart was they were exploiting every potential source, right? Starting and most heavily emphasizing the customer. And then again, of these 4 sources listed, half of the leaders were using all 4 sources. So you can see these are all very important. Of course, being IDC, we're going to say, boy, that benchmarking studies from outside organizations looks important. But the key thing is to use all these different sources. And the other thing, quite frankly, is to get your customer to buy into all of them, that they're all valid sources and that they're important in terms of telling the whole story. And that's a big part of change management you've got to work with.
Hey, Randy.
Yeah.
Question before we pass it over to Eric that I think might be beneficial to others. Pratik from Sumo Logic is asking, how were the leaders versus average companies defined? So can you maybe just talk really briefly again about the difference between the leaders versus the rest of the?
Okay, so when we do any kind of study that that you can group organizations by maturity or readiness or how advanced they are, we typically do a scale where we have certain points associated for each question. We do scoring, and then we associate that scoring with improvements in business outcomes. So one of the questions we ask is, by how much have you improved your business outcomes, the business outcomes that are most important to you over this time? And we find that organizations that one can articulate what their business outcomes, desired business outcomes are, one. Two, can actually quantify the improvements that they've seen, tend to be the most advanced companies. So if you correlate those improvement measures to certain questions, it helps you identify organizations that scored. If you had a scoring on an organization from 1 to 5, say, those that scored at 5 also get the best business outcomes. So we use that in all of IDC analysis. We use that every time we do maturity, because what's the purpose of implementing technology these days anyway? It's to improve your business outcomes. So if you can give best practices that are used by leaders as an example, and those leaders are getting better business outcomes than the average, way better than the folks at the low end, then that makes their advice meaningful because it directly relates to better business outcomes. That's kind of our methodology. That's what we used here. Again, we took the top 10% of companies in this case, just to compare the top 10% to the average.
Great. And I have one.
Go ahead.
Just one more from Katie Bianchi. What correlation is there to companies who have advanced value realization sales and customer success maturity to growth and sustainability of NDR? And Katie, feel free to jump in if you want to elaborate.
NDR?
Net dollar retention.
Okay, you're going to have to educate me on that.
Sure. So I think, one of the things would be great to understand is, how do we tie value realization to growth of the company? How do we correlate that? So in the SaaS world, net dollar retention is proof that we're able to grow and expand our existing base.
So again, in our methodology, we did this for this particular study. Now, we're not showing those particular slides, but the organizations that scored in this top 10% got, they had better revenue growth. They had better customer retention, significantly better. So that's how we did for this particular study. Now, if we wanted to do a set of tasks and questions and things that organizations are doing these days, best practices, organizational practices, and then tie those to a set of business outcomes, and you had NDR as a business outcome, assuming that everybody measures that in a consistent way, then you could do that. And then again, you could directly correlate to show which particular activities more significantly than others related to that. So you do a correlation. It's either Pearson or what's the other one? Spearman correlation between how they answer one question and the improvement on business outcomes. And that enables you to directly again, track certain activities to that, or weigh those activities in a different way.
Yeah. Katie, I like, maybe that's something because we're going to be continuing to benchmark. I think that's really provocative, because if you think back to the SaaS model, NRR or NDR, some type of what was my run rate at the beginning of the year, what's my net run rate at the end of the year, has that grown? You should be able to make a correlation to a strong value realization practice, customers acknowledging, accepting, getting memorialized value, and their ability to want to grow. I think that's a really interesting set of research that we continue to maybe noodle on for future benchmarking within the community.
Yeah, we've been working on that a little bit, as we've had over a year now of some formalized level of value realization work and effort in the renewal motion. And our renewal rates are already pretty high, and but that concept of net dollar retention or net ACV, whatever you want to call it, we actually did study that when our team was involved and engaged in some level of value realization work and effort with the customer, not only did they renew at full value, but we had double the uplift at the renewal time for net new ACV associated with that renewal. So we are trying to find the areas that we can credibly, with sales ops and finance validation, claim that the work that we're doing and the kinds of conversations that we're enabling actually has a positive effect on that NDR.
So Mark, you're
That's
saying,
really helpful, Mark.
yeah, Mark, so you're saying when your team was involved, the initial hypothesis or data that's coming back is saying that NDR was basically 200%, NRR was 200% for those set of customers?
Not the net dollar retention is 200%. The uplift over the renewal expectation. So if the renewal expectation is $1 million, and we ran a value realization engagement with the customer to shore up that $1 million, but then also take that as an opportunity to talk about how we can expand that $1 million in some way, shape, or form. The uplift that we got, if we weren't involved, that might have been $1.1 million, but when we're involved, it gets to $1.2 million. We're double the uplift off of the renewal plus getting the renewal. But there's so much that happens over the course of that life of that customer. For us to actually claim or any level of correlation that we caused that renewal is just never going to hold water. But we were able to make the claim on that uplift.
Hey, Mark, can I make a quick comment? This is Shek, I can't resist these things. But
Please,
number one,
bring it on.
great to talk to Mark, man, my good friend that I haven't spoken to in a little while. So this is like, if you're talking about the renewals, this is typically kind of turning a renewal into a selling event. That's what VEs will do for you, right? It's like re-engaging the customer, invalidating what they've got, and reopening the conversation channels. So then you can actually, as opposed to just doing kind of an auto renewal, because if you don't treat that as a renewal, as a selling event, all you're doing is renewing a contract, right? So the uplift is going to be like quasi zero, versus if you actually re-engage the customer, prove to them that they've gotten value, and then identify new opportunities for you and them to grow, I think is a way to do it. So congrats, Mark.
That's absolutely the way that we've been looking at it, as a SaaS vendor that has to renew customers every 3 years. And as a platform vendor, our goal to upsell and cross-sell as well as renew is how we maintain that growth. And so we look at that renewal event as an opportunity to how are we going to grow our relationship with that customer and help them deliver more of their business outcomes and help us grow our NDR in this particular case.
Hey, quick question, Mark. This is Laura Lindsay from Microsoft. When you guys are measuring all of this, are you measuring your team against account level value, or are you looking at specific opportunities?
Or a portfolio.
Yeah, or a portfolio, sure.
It generally, the renewal is the start of an opportunity in our system, but ultimately we're looking at when we're adding net new ACV to that renewal, it could be across multiple opportunities. So it's more looking at that account value as to how we're growing that overall account value.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mark. So I think we're going to bring in Eric to kind of guide us going forward here.
Yeah. First off, Randy and the IDC team, thank you for doing this. You know, one of the coolest parts of this forum is we actually get to learn from one another. And many of us are kind of lone wolves in our organizations, even though we have teams and we're supporting customers and things like that, where you don't always get to see what else people have been doing. So when we were thinking about ideas, the suggestion was discussed. How do we actually bring some sort of benchmarking capabilities so we can add some quantification behind what it is we're doing? So I'm thrilled that Ecosystems has done this, thrilled with what the IDC team has done. It's been very illuminating for me. Confirmed a couple of things and then pointed out some other things that I didn't think were true. And we're going to explore some of those items because there were some variations, and we'll go through it a reasonable amount of time, but I want to save a little bit of time for discussion. So if you can advance to the next slide, a couple of things that stood out. And the one thing that stood out here, and again, we're comparing the value track against the larger community and then trying to explain the variance. A couple of items came up as it pertains to risk and resilience. The first one, if you look, increasing business resilience was not a top business goal for any of us. Any of us. And the first thing that I thought to myself is, I'm like, okay, you don't know if your business is resilient until you actually need to stress it or test it. And do we actually underestimate how truly resilient we are versus others? The next area, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the content here, is reducing business risk. We were lower on average than what the community had more interest in reducing business risk. And we actually don't see a lot of what we do in terms of reducing business risk. Is that part of our remit, or is it something that we're underestimating? And then the last area is that we felt we were sufficiently prepared to adopt new ways of doing things. But it wasn't like one of those overwhelming things where you were like, yeah, we were in really good shape. And actually only 20% of community's respondents were of the same as the value track responses. So let's pause here for a second. Give some thoughts in terms of what you think that we can glean from this as a group around resilience and risk. Does it not matter in our roles? Or are we too busy highlighting that value driver for our customers that we don't think about it within our own business?
I mean, I think it's I see business risk as something that we are hyper focused on every day, and you can label it a few different things. You can call it the leaky bucket. You can call I look at that as part of the remit of any customer success and go-to-market organization. You can fill the top of the funnel and you can get the net new logos all you want, but if you got a leaky bucket, you're still going nowhere. The boat's still sinking. The resilience thing, I find that number funny. I feel like that's that is I look at that as the remit of every CSM that's in our organization, that they're securing, their remit is to secure and to respond for, in the event of anything, right? In the event of organizational shift and structure deprioritization, project cancellation, loss of sponsorship. And we see it as part of our remit to mitigate resilience and to make sure we're always focused on clogging the leaky bucket. There's some overlap there, but I'm surprised that these numbers were as low as they are.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I would just volunteer here because I've worked at a couple of different organizations. Again, Laura Lindsay, Microsoft, that what we're seeing here is a reflection of how people get paid and how they're like where they fit across the spectrum. So in some technology organizations, you only get paid on net new ACV. On others, you get paid on net new ACV plus renewals. So I think it depends on where you sit within the organization and how you get paid. And I think it's pretty rare to see a value organization that goes over across everything. Some of the stuff, Chad, I think you were talking about earlier with driving value with product development is pretty cutting edge. As much as we talk about it, the people that are running these departments in Techland haven't really gotten there yet. But I hope it's only a matter of time.
Agreed. Any other differing perspectives or different reactions to this? All right, let's move on to value.
I have a quick comment.
Of course,
Actually, I think risk is really important, not just in value realization, but upfront. So we actually use something we call risk and threat assessment, and we codify that because you don't want this risk to be loosely defined. You want it to be really well defined. That really helps kind of instill a sense of urgency. Whether it's like for you guys moving something to the cloud, the workload, so that, finance people who are often the ultimate decision makers, they're like, why do today what you can do tomorrow? And this is a great way to kind of instill a little bit of fear, in the process, so that, hey, if you walk away from this, at least walk away with your eyes wide open. There's tremendous risk that you're like posing on for your organization.
Yeah, well put, Chuck. And I knew you'd come in at the last minute with a sentence there. Thank you, my friend. Let's talk about value management platform. And this one was curious, not because of what the value track have. All members of our group have a value management platform. We are very self-selecting on that one. But the one thing that I think caught us a bit by surprise in this was that the community, 2/3 of them didn't have a value management platform. So a way of communicating and unifying and expressing value to their customers. And not many of them had the intention to do so in the upcoming year. So let's kind of take a step back. Why do we think that is? Is it that the companies that are focused on value are going to be the ones that are going to continue to do it and continue to invest? Or are they selecting themselves out, or are they doing it in other tools? Give me a little bit of perspective based on what you folks are seeing with your colleagues and peers, because obviously if you're in the value management track, you've already got one. You're probably thinking, there's no way I can deal with it without a value management platform.
I heard a couple times here about being the lone wolf and different terminology used that really suggests that this concept is not unified. Not everyone agrees with it. This is not a standard. I had to sell it internally. I had to convince all kinds of people to put down the money for the tools and put the people and the OpEx in place. And there's a variety of things I've heard from, hey, sellers should just know this. It's not really that important. You'll never get out of the end of quarter, end of month, even in the SaaS world, all the different bad behavior. It is what it is, kind of, so to speak. So I think there's a leadership, there's a belief system. There's how you really view your customers. I mean, if you want to view your customers forever, then you have to do this, and you better just find the courage and the hearts to do it. And it's not universal.
The thing I agree with that. The other thing that has been common for the last, 20, 30 years is that use cases and value have often been the de facto defining standard within sales ops and sales, and sort of the tip of the spear. How do I get this deal done? I'm going to talk about use cases, and I'm going to talk about that. The reality is you're setting the customer up with that use case because there's going to be an outcome associated with it. And the ability to capture it and measure it and then be held accountable to it is a new concept. But David, I don't know if this is your quote, or I know I've heard you say it before, but there's no such thing as pre-sales anymore. It's like just this constant cycle of commitment, delivery on the commitment, commitment and delivery on the commitment. I think this will be the new norm going forward. I don't see how it can't be, especially in the world where every dollar has to be renewed, either every year or every 2 years or every 3 years. But it's not, it is like not the norm. There's still companies out there that go, you sell and then you throw it over the wall, and then they deal with it, the aftermath after throwing it over the wall. This concept links pre and post. This concept transcends different functions, selling versus delivering. And I think it's one that we've had a lot of success with so far.
how are we defining platform? I mean, that's a pretty general term, and I think it means different things to different organizations. And I think there's degrees of maturity of what a platform is able to do in terms of scaling across the organization. How was the value track kind of defining it when, because if it's too broad, everybody's going to say, yeah, we have that, but what is it from a capability standpoint that platform is able to scale?
Randy, for purely empirical and research purposes, how was value management platform defined in the survey?
We'd have to pull up the question.
Okay.
It was fairly definitive. I don't know if anybody's got it handy.
Yeah, and maybe it's just worth in the interest of time. The great thing about these surveys is it points out areas of commonality. What you oftentimes miss is context. What is in the very definition of the platform, and I think it was Laura in the chat highlighted, how do people even define value management? So there's almost two definitions that need to come into play. Kasha, this could be a nice topic for us to tackle in the future. We may be able to have that. So let's not lose sight of that one.
I will say
one idea would be to say, okay, what does good look like for a value management platform? What is kind of typical and what's lagging? And then say, okay, which is your organization at or striving to go towards?
I will say, well, I don't remember the definition exactly. It was broken out, so there was an understanding that it's separate from internally created tools, externally created tools, ROI calculators and things like that. So it was distinguished from some other things that you might or might not think of as related to value management.
Okay.
And there was a distinct idea that it ties in with other systems, like CRM, within your organization.
Good. All right, let's move on to the next one. And I loved this one. I just loved it. Total chicken or the egg. Largest challenges for the sales organization. The value track said our reps are not skilled at selling to C-level buyers. Would you think about the work that we do, the function that we perform, that's probably a very real, I feel like the number is probably good. Now, the community, on the other hand, said pipeline development. We can't find enough qualified buyers. So is it that there's not enough qualified buyers, or that we're not showing up strong enough from being able to sell to those C-level buyers when we get there? And that, I just absolutely love that. I'm like, this is like a perfect juxtaposition. So the question for the group, is it finding the qualified buyers, or is it that we're not taking full advantage of the opportunities that we tackle? Is it the value track that's got the right lens, or is it the community that maybe we could learn from?
Number two.
Be interested in
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think it depends. I think it depends on what you're trying to sell and who you're trying to sell to, in the maturity of the organization, in the stakeholders of how well do they know your product and capability. More importantly, how well do they know the capabilities of what you're trying to position.
Look, Craig, let me ask you a question as a follow-up to that. Do you think that by and large our value teams in this particular audience and the folks here are more focused on once the deal's in place, and so they've got kind of a unique aperture to see that, hey, maybe we're not as skilled at selling to these C-level buyers, and maybe we don't spend as much time or feel the pain or brunt of pipeline development and business development?
Well, I think it's always a challenge, especially for the sales organization, not just to be relevant for the customer, but to have a compelling point of view of what's going to stand out versus competition and the option of doing nothing. So being able to be very specific to not just the industry that the customer's in, but the current needs and I guess the perceived needs that stakeholder has. And it's going to vary based on every stakeholder that you meet, and it's all sometimes based on timing as well. So I think that's kind of the art of being consultative with your sales organization to go in and be a little bit adaptable, to poke around to see, as you're discovering, where your capabilities and solutions really could hit the mark, as opposed to going in, very targeted and saying, this is what I'm gonna sell, and I've always sold it that way.
All right. Others, especially if you haven't chatted yet, offer up some observations here.
I'll jump. Sorry, Eric. This is interesting. So I think we're sometimes too externally customer focused, right? And which is good. I feel bad just saying that, but and we don't take into account the major change management that needs to occur in an organization, right? Rewiring kind of the sales DNA into more value, whether that's with value engineering or not, I think is where the biggest challenge lies. Because if you're able to do that, then what you want is your salespeople to actually, position the capability of your organization as a whole as accretive to your effort and really delivering real value. I think the second thing is like spending more time with the seller, not just working on deals, but really internalizing the challenges they go through. Because if you put yourself in their shoes, what happens a lot is some like high-level person in the organization will come and say, hey, now we're going to do value selling, right? And this is notorious and happens a lot at kickoffs, right? Where they have like 15 initiatives. And I think like a little bit of empathy and a little bit of going back to the well and kind of creating, at least for me, creating a lot of new initiatives based on what the hot buttons are. So not just focusing on your day-to-day VE, but actually talking to them and taking some cues and trying to help them on day-to-day things. So for example, we do value engineering cadence calls with salespeople. With each region on a like weekly or bi-weekly basis, where we hear from them, what are the topics, where are you challenged? And we try to create specific initiatives to help them advance the cause. Because if you do that kind of from the bottom up, then you get the buy-in, and then actually your customer experience as far as value is concerned becomes much easier.
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
I'd love to, maybe Jeff at Workiva. Jeff, I'd love to bring you in. And how do you, I think it's an interesting juxtaposition, the pipeline versus the rep, and we always hear about getting to the C-level and challenges with the reps. What are you experiencing, sensing, feeling from a Workiva standpoint? And then I'd love to get Joanne Taylor to kind of give a perspective as well.
Yeah, so our organization, when we started a value management program, less than 2 years ago, so we're still new. Our sales team had to date, for the most part, a pretty narrow solution set, fairly low ADS, and operated in a transactional kind of way. And value management was the engine, and we started with 3 folks. I was one of them that was adept at selling to C-level types of folks. And that really wasn't a skill set that permeated throughout most of the sales organization. So for me, that would be highlighted. That having been said, as the solution set expands and all of a sudden 5 solutions, 6 solutions are being considered at once instead of kind of 1 or 2, it requires that more senior type of kind of talk track. So what I've been working on in a very kind of step-by-step fashion, because I think that's all that, I think that needs to happen instead of sort of a big bang, is focusing on enabling the sellers and working with us, but we have a small team across a lot of different opportunities and sellers, identifying what the outcomes, the potential desired outcomes are for C-level executives, which is very different than the potential operational leader desired outcomes. I think that is something that is starting to really help within the organization, but that's the stage we're at. So pipeline development, to me, at least at Workiva, I think we have an abundance of. I think it's around, as we grow our small team, how do we evangelize the notion of putting our sellers in the shoes of a different audience than they've needed to put themselves in, into that perspective.
Yeah, so I would agree with Jeff in regards to the challenges. Some of the challenges I had prior at Nuance have now just moved back into management consulting at Alex Partners. But historically, when I was at Nuance, what we were seeing is that we were selling at a much lower level. We weren't even going into the C-suite. And I don't know that it really dawned on folks that that's really where we needed to be in order to cultivate long-lasting relationships, as well as to really drive the value realization from a client perspective. So I have the team focus on with our customer success team, which did not have a quota, but would work with the sales teams on, is put programs in place whereby we could then elevate the conversation in the existing account base and really turning this into a retention play. So that as we were seeing competitors come in, bigger competitors come in and really try to consume the solutions that we had, we were lacking basically a beachhead of relationship. And so what we started doing is pairing up folks to go and actually be proactive in reaching out to the C-suites, leveraging our existing client base to help make introductions if we didn't have them, and really putting some hard effort into relationship cultivation at the C-suite or level one, but also then expanding across the organization into what I would call consumers of the solution that we had sold. So we may have sold into, for example, a contact center, but really some of our key stakeholders were the CX people. And so really trying to go in and build that out. And then kind of tying that back to Eric and some of the value realization, we took the attack of our largest accounts. We have very long tail, but really taking that tier 1, tier 2 account base with the largest revenue and revenue opportunity, and doing value realization plans, which are really customer success plans, like disguised as value realization, and doing that with an ecosystem, no pun intended, at the client level, whereby we're bringing in CX, the finance teams, risk and compliance, and what have you, and really mapping out for all of the stakeholders and constituents, what does success look like? Not of just our solution, but what are they trying to do from a customer experience, retention of their own customers, and what have you. So trying to overcome the lack of being able to sell into that C-suite, moving it more on a retention play, and really trying to force the entire organization to come at it for how do we best get into the C-suite or go across the org. I don't know if that's helpful here or not.
Yeah, it does. Great comments. Thank you, Joanne and Jeff. I'll bring it back to Eric here.
Absolutely.
Can I just add one thing on top of that? And it's brief. We talked a lot about things you do within your sales and value management organization, but you've got to remember that it's really a responsibility of your marketing organizations to pre-sell these C-levels on what your value proposition is. So it's one thing to have to explain it to them after the fact, but if your marketing's done correctly and you're targeting the C-level correctly up front, they understand what your value proposition is. So it's much easier for the salesperson to have that conversation because they're talking about the same thing. And I think that's one of the gaps that companies miss, is that this link between marketing and sales is just not always quite as unified as it should be, especially product marketing. They're all over the board, right? But again, anything your organization sells, it should have your value proposition up front, so C-levels realize what it is.
Yeah. Well, let's get to our final topic, which is measuring value realization. And again, this last section that we've gone through here and had discussion around is where we saw huge disparities. And this may be the biggest disparity that we saw. in terms of where are you getting the data that actually shows that your customer is getting value from it. The value track responded with 81% of the time, it's the customer. Whereas the community said that their technology solution was actually feeding it to them. So I thought this was a really interesting one as well, is what is it that our two groups are doing differently? Is the orientation of our value realization efforts across the community or across our value management track, are they really focused on making sure that we work with the customer on value realization, therefore we have to get the data from them? Or the broader community that hasn't tooled in this same way to have this conversation is essentially saying it's the reporting that's out of the available capability. This was one that I quite frankly couldn't reconcile because it's such a dramatic difference, because both sides a clear majority and in fact a vast majority in the value track. How do you folks react to it, and help me think through what measuring value realization looks like?
Eric, was there a differentiation of where the value was could there have been a misinterpretation of kind of where value was being set versus where and how it was being measured ongoing?
Yeah, I that may be it. Yeah, explain that a little further.
So, if different tech does different things, right? So customers might say, you might have this Bible or this list of use cases. I'm interested in these 3. And so the customer is setting the tone for how the land deal, or maybe if it's an upsell deal, is being valued. And then as implementation adoption takes place, there could be phone home, there could be, for data that's coming back, could be support bundles that are bringing data back from a platform that give a value team the data they need to tie back to the expectations that the customer set. So I've seen it happen before where the customer says, I like 1, 2, and 3. And it's the tech that kind of gives you the data in an ongoing way of how you're tracking against 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, this is Teresa Anania from Zendesk. I agree with that because I actually think when reading this, like it makes sense to me. First of all, with our largest customers, we're obviously wanting to hear directly from them the outcomes expected and then validate from our technology data and insights how we're tracking against those, and then hear from them if they agree. So we try to get ahead of it with our largest customers to quantify and be able to measure this, and then we validate it with what they're saying and seeing. And then when you scale, you're not really able to get much of that directly from the customer. So the technology solution starts to be more the proxy for what the customer, would tell us or could tell us. That seems to be how I read this. That's how I would have answered it.
I think that's a great call out, Teresa, as well, especially from a scale standpoint. The one thing that I would state too, or another consideration, is a level of maturity within the organization itself. So I also look at some of this as, a more inward focused understanding of the customer versus actually understanding. And if you think about like the status of an account, I'll just make it simple, red, yellow, green, right? And sometimes folks will look at the data and be like, oh, everything's green and great. Meanwhile, you talk to the client and they're like red and hot and they would like to fire you right now if they could. And I think there's this balance, and I think, Teresa, that's really where you're going. And I think possibly Alex as well, is that I think that the voice of the customer is, in my mind, the truth. And oftentimes you need to use data to help them reframe the truth that they see or what their truth is. But I think that sometimes, at least in some of the organizations that I've worked with as a consultant, is they get hung up on the tech says everything is good. And meanwhile, the client is like ready to figure out, how do I terminate the contract?
Right.
And I think that there is, the voice of the customer needs to be number one, substantiated with the data behind it. And then if you're going to utilize data or automation of the long tail or your lower valued customers, there's a balance that has to come. And Teresa, you're spot on, that tech has to help you scale.
Mm-hmm.
Here.
And John's chiming in, trust. John believes strongly in trust.
Well, I was just saying I eat up the airtime, but I can't tell you how many sellers I go to. Well, what's the business case? Oh, they won't tell us that. Can you extrapolate? You'll use that against me. You'll jack up the price. I mean, there's so many lower level political and power related answers. One, they don't know. Two, they're afraid to tell you. And so you got to find that nuance of providing it for them. And if the trust level goes up, what do? They give you way more information. And that's what I think you're seeing here is folks who are believers in it and trust and business outcomes. Those customers are seeing it and they're saying, hey, come on in here, pour through our data, help us save $1 billion. And those that don't have trust, I think it's going to be used against them, that you're using your own stuff and you're probably guessing at it in a way that that's reflected here possibly.
And you got it from Teresa. John, you were just on my last call. Amen to John.
Right.
Well, folks, we're almost to the end. Let me just give you a quick preview of some of the topics that we've brainstormed for 2021. And some of this was based on the survey, and others are some of the ideas. And the real ask here is we're going to ask some of you folks to participate and help us think through these. First off, we hear a lot about AI and machine learning. How do you actually generate value from it? So we're going to spend a whole session going through that. How do you embed value into an organization's DNA and get that to be part of how it operates? What are some of the best practices that we validate value in the world of SaaS? And in order to do that, you have to kind of like show it, build it, and capture it. We're going to look at a little bit about performance maturity. There's some risk elements that we're going to revisit, and also some threats. Shek, you highlighted some of those. And then lastly, how do you set up for scale globally? Now, the sequencing of these will actually be fairly open. And quite frankly, we always look for good topics. So if you have anything to volunteer, just work through Kasha and she'll put that all together. But we thank you folks for joining us today. This is riveting as always.
Great conversation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. Eric does such a great job as our track chair. Thank you, Eric. You make it so nice to kind of meander through and find some reactions and find some insights, and you keep it very informal, which I love about our group. So excellent job. And Randy, thank you for all the labor behind the benchmarking survey and the results and the analysis. We're grateful to have IDC part of our community. Just in wrap up, guys, as we close out, you heard from Teresa. She's such a great new member of our group, and she's been very active, and she's going to help lead a session in early March around expansion. Isn't that a hot topic? How do we expand? What's the right sequence? Who does what? How does account management, customer success? There's such richness in that discussion around expansion. So Teresa and Dave Coker and Christoph Bowden are going to really tag team to bring us some of their best thinking. We love when the community kind of signs up. We also have Randy doing a webinar on kind of the aspects of B2B marketing and selling. As Randy talked about earlier, that finding that bridge between the two is going to be critical. And I'll just close with what Eric said, which is we love to hear from the members. This is a member-driven community. So if there's topics that are really burning platform issues that you want to have us incorporate in 2021, please let us know. Let Kasha know, and we'll incorporate it into the agenda. And with that, I'm going to wish everyone a great day. Final point here is IDC, being a founding member of our community, is offering free registration for this event. We'll make sure we put this link out for everybody so that you can sign up free for the members around delivering digital resiliency in this very constantly changing world. So know that that's compliments of our partners at IDC. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day, and we'll get after it. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.